I'm sorry. He seemed somewhat contrite, but cynically Pete thought he was probably just looking for a way to get into her pants one day. Carrie said, I don't know if we'll ever be friends again, Ricky, but I'll try to be polite and at least friendly. That's the best I can do right now. I understand. Ricky turned to Brian. Mr. Williamson, I'm sorry about what I did to Carrie and her SUV. Just send us the bill and we'll take care of it. The words, I'm sorry, may have come out of his mouth, but he didn't seem very sorry. Brian just nodded. When Ricky looked at Pete, the contriteness was gone. Mr. Clark, I apologize for interrupting the party and barging onto your property. I shouldn't have done that. Okay, Ricky. Thank you. I think we're done here. Before Ricky turned to walk back to his car, he had a smirk on his face that they all could see. When he reached the car door, he looked at Pete and mouthed the word kitty. Pete opened his hand and pointed to it like he did Saturday, meaning he'd believe him when he saw the evidence. Ricky grinned and got in his car. Brian said, well, his apology to Carrie seemed sincere, but ours? Not so much. What did he say to you before he drove off? Pete shook his head. Nothing important. We had a discussion as he was leaving the other day. He was bringing it up to try and provoke me again. Carrie wanted to say something, but she felt terrible that she had ever agreed to go out with him in the first place. Talk about a poor decision. Brian said, well, if you need any help with him, just let me know. I can have a team of lawyers on him and his father with one phone call. I might even find a deputy or two that could shadow him for a couple of weekends. That could prove entertaining. He smiled at the thought. Thanks, Brian. Let's hold off on that for now. I've got a few other problems I need to resolve first. Brian nodded. After dropping Eva at home yesterday, Carrie told her parents all the nasty things that Ricky had said about Joan. They had known Joan for years. None of them thought he was telling the truth. At least, they hoped so. Brian and Pete shook hands. Carrie gave him a goodbye hug, and they drove away. Pete opened the garage and drove off after they left. As he was pulling out of his driveway, Joan's car was approaching. Pete didn't even bother to wave as he pointed his car north towards Louisville. He would use the time to figure out what he was going to do regarding getting some evidence, one way or another. What he needed most of all was to get away. He was still furious with his wife for the disrespect, and with Ricky's accusations on top, he knew he wouldn't be able to keep from saying something he might regret. He would use the time away to calm himself and prepare. 10 minutes later, his phone was ringing. He considered not answering, but decided there wasn't much left to lose except the aggravation. Maybe he could placate her enough that she would leave him alone while he was gone. Hello, Joan. Pete, I hope you are only going to the store and coming right back. No. My client needed me to come to Louisville a couple of days early. I'll be there until after I have lunch with them on Friday. I should be home in time to eat dinner with you after that. Then he decided to get in a little dig. Well, that assumes you won't be traveling with Andrew this weekend. She was surprised by the comment. What? No. You know I only travel every 6 to 8 weeks. Why would you say that? It's nothing. Had you been there on Saturday, you would have seen the whole thing. I'm still a little upset over your taking Ricky's side. I know you are, and I'm sorry. Andrew isn't very happy either, but that is understood. Did Ricky show up and apologize? Pete said. He gave what seemed like a sincere apology to Carrie, but I suspect that was because he'd still want to try to have sex with her someday. He told Brian and me he was sorry, but that was the most disingenuous apology I've ever received. You and Andrew should be happy that he's not going to jail. He's just a kid, Pete. He's a 20-year-old young man that needs to get his anger under control and learn to respect others. Joan let out an audible sigh. I want to talk to you about all of this tonight. Can we talk when you get home on Friday? Sure. I'll miss you, Pete. Pete thought that she wouldn't. Have a good week, Joan. Then he hung up the phone. Joan was surprised at how he ended their conversation. This whole thing was upsetting her sweet husband. While she still thought he wasn't very understanding regarding how the whole situation impacted her work, she knew this would just be a bump in their long road together. On Friday, she'd prepare him something nice to eat and plan to give him a nice night in the bedroom as well. Then this would all blow over. It was just over 3 hours to Louisville, plenty of time to think about what he needed to do. He was pretty sure that the brat, Ricky, knew too much for it to just be idle gossip. It didn't say very much about his father that he would share that kind of info with his son, but if Andrew was the kind of man that slept with married women, the fact that he isn't the greatest father wouldn't come as too much of surprise, either. The only thing he truly suspected was that Joan and Andrew screwed while away on trips. Of course, they could be having sex in town, as Ricky said. Andrew was divorced, so they wouldn't even need hotels. Damn. However, he suspected that Ricky would be looking for proof to rub Pete's nose in it. He could try to fabricate something, but Pete would be on the lookout for that. What Pete planned to do was to travel as much as he could for the next several weeks. If she was a cheater and he was out of town, then the two of them might get careless and do it at their house. Andrew seemed like just enough of an a-hole to want to try that, and Joan seemed beholden enough to Andrew that she might allow it. Or maybe Pete should just hire a PI and have them followed. Sigh. He couldn't believe it had come to this, but Joan's disrespect of him was unexpected. Hal wondered how long he had been blinded by his love for his wife. As soon as he checked into his hotel, he went to Amazon, opened a new account, and ordered several different hidden Wi-Fi cameras and planned to place them in his house. They would be delivered on Thursday to his hotel. Hopefully, they would never record anything, but he wasn't liking the odds on that. It was a long week for everyone. Eva called her dad a couple of times, and he told her he was fine. Donnie even called once to check on him, and Pete told him the same thing. Everything was okay. Joan left text and voice messages telling him that she loved him and missed him. They were conveniently left during the times when Pete was with his clients. He was glad of that because he didn't want to talk to Joan. On Friday, he made the 3.5-hour drive home, dreading what might be waiting for him, but it went better than expected. When he arrived, Joan was dressed nicely in a flattering dress that hit just above her knees. She was wearing high heels and nice jewelry, which Pete suspected meant that she wanted to go out to eat. In her heels, she was as tall as him, which never bothered him at all. He always loved having her on his arm. That night, he was fine with their going out because it would keep her in a good mood and likely prevent any conversation from wandering towards anything serious until they got home. He changed quickly, and she asked him to drive them to a swanky steakhouse that she knew he liked. Like the evenings where they would go to performances, she was on his arm all night. She eased off one of her shoes and rubbed his leg under the table. He hated that she could have this effect on him when he was still aggravated. He wondered how many more nights there would be like this, praying that he was wrong but fearing that what he suspected was true. Once at home, as soon as they walked through the door, she was all over him. They didn't make it past the family room before she had removed her dress and thong and was working on his zipper. Standing there in her garters and heels had the desired effect on Pete, and Joan didn't mind one bit when he pulled her up, spun her around, and screwed her while she was bent over the couch. She pulled him up the stairs towards the bedroom and did it again. That was wonderful. I needed that. I love you, Pete. He hugged his wife and replied, I loved you too, Joan. She missed the verb tense. After she had lain on him for a few more minutes, she went to the restroom to prepare for bed. Upon returning to the bedroom, she spooned back into her husband, pulled his arm around herself, and blissfully went to sleep, believing all was right with the world. The following morning found Joan already awake and drawing circles on her husband's chest. Once she could tell he was good and awake, she said, Thank you for last night. It was a good night. He had to admit it was rather nice. My pleasure, sweetie. The word sweetie caused him to remember what Ricky had said. Joan said, I do need to tell you something, but I hope you won't get too upset. I need to go to Memphis to meet with one of our university clients on Thursday. They want a complete review of their portfolio. I should be back on Friday. Oh, how did this happen? Don't these get scheduled a little further out in advance? She replied, Normally they do, but a competitor has been talking to them, and they are one of my top clients, so Andrew wants me to go talk some sense into them. Oh, so you were going alone this time? I am. They've been with me a long time, so it should be okay. He was quietly thinking for a minute. She asked him, Are you okay? He said, Yeah, I'm in a similar situation. I have to travel next weekend and all the following week. General Dynamics VP of Supply Chain over their Gulfstream division wants me to attend a supply chain IT conference with him in Orlando. Then I'll be with them at their Savannah factory the rest of the week. She sat up at that revelation, causing herself to become uncovered, which looked amazing as her jugs were still jiggling once she was sitting. Not caring much about anything else anymore, Pete reacted by pulling her to him so he could begin to kiss. Pete had always loved her figure, because she still was and always had been very curvy, with full jugs and bum to match. Joan wanted to know more about what was an unusual trip for him. Slow, morning sex followed by a good shower had been rare for them over the last several years, and they both enjoyed it immensely. She hated that they didn't do it more often, but she knew that was partially her fault. Pete hated feeling like it was all about to come to a painful end. Sitting over breakfast, she didn't want to ask, but she did anyway. Pete, we didn't talk about last weekend. Are we okay? I hope you know how much I love you. We need to find a way past this because I have long-term plans for you and for us. He smiled at her and squeezed her hand. I'd like that too, Joan. Though he didn't think it was going to happen, he had to give her credit. She tried all weekend and early the following week to love him, not only with sex, as much as she had in many, many years. He did his best to reciprocate, but he honestly felt like the end was quickly coming. Over the weekend, he installed a small GPS tracker on her car to map out where she went. He took all the Amazon shipments that had been hiding in the trunk of his car and put them into place. He replaced smoke detectors, books on bookshelves, and wall receptacles with devices containing hidden Wi-Fi cameras and microphones. He added a couple of outdoor cameras to his security system. His house was now completely covered for video and sound, and rather than feeling prepared, he felt terrible. On Thursday morning, Joan kissed him goodbye, and he asked, "Will you drive your car to Memphis or grab a rental?" "I'll take mine. Don't worry, the company will reimburse the mileage, and I'll be safe for driving my car." "Okay, be careful." "I will, baby. Love you." "Love you too." It didn't take long to get confirmation of what he feared. A few hours later, when she should have been either at their Brentwood office or on I-40 driving to Memphis, the GPS on her car was showing at Andrew's house. His marriage was officially over. Pete needed to burn off some steam, so he went to his dojo to spar with whoever was there and then work out. He wanted to stay sharp, because if he ever got the chance, he'd make Andrew pay physically. So much for self-defense only. "Thanks again, Joan." Joan did him the courtesy of texting him later in the day, saying she had made it safely to Memphis. The GPS still showed her car at Andrew's house. He prepared for his fake trip to Orlando and decided he would call tomorrow to find a PI to tell his wife. He didn't need to bother. Early Friday morning, an email was delivered to his business email address with the subject, "For the kitty bear." In the message it said, "I found your email on your website. I've been working on my dad, and he told me that before long, I'll be screwing her, too." Included was a link to a cloud account that included hours and hours of video from several cameras in Andrew's home. It seemed to be recently set up and was recording the events live as they happened. He watched the first recorded stream and saw Joan and Andrew walking into the house. Andrew began undressing her in the family room, and like Pete the previous Friday night, Andrew had Joan bent over his couch screwing her. Pete had seen enough. He drove up to the airport, parked his car in long-term parking, and called his wife and was sent to voicemail, as expected. He left a message saying, "I'm at the airport and leaving now. I'll text you while I'm gone." With the background noise from the airport, it would sound like he was flying out soon. He didn't fly anywhere. He went to the airport Marriott to hang out and watch some of the evidence he now had on his wife. Stupid kid. Pete didn't really need, nor want, to see them having sex. That one time over the back of the couch was enough. Actually, simply seeing her car at Andrew's house overnight was enough. He was curious regarding what they would say, though. It was soul-crushing. Even not watching the video, he had to suffer through the moaning and groaning and slapping and slurping. But eventually he heard several key pieces of information. First, "Andrew, I know today and tomorrow are because you're pissed, but it's not like you have to try and reclaim me. I know that. Why would I need to reclaim what is already mine? I'm still pissed off about Ricky having to apologize. You need to learn how to better control your little husband. I've been withholding myself from him like you asked me to." She lied. He thundered, "Ask? I don't ask you to do anything. You do what I tell you to do if you want all the benefits that come with me." She was getting tired of this overbearing and owning behavior. She was fairly certain that Andrew was close to his expiration date if she wanted to keep her marriage intact, which she did. "I know that. I like being with you, but I love Pete. He's a good father and a good husband. I'm not giving him up either. He and I are going to ride off into the sunset together. If you love him so much, why are you screwing me?" She smiled at him. "You know why. You miss being with a big man." "I know. It's okay, baby. No, it's not your big tool, though I'm not complaining. He is a fine lover, it's just that I don't know. Sometimes I like being with someone who I can still look up to when I'm wearing my heels. I like wearing a man's t-shirt that hangs below my butt. I like putting my hand on your biceps and feeling something large, not just lean. When you and I walk down a street, I never have to worry about someone coming up and picking a fight with you. After working with you all these years, I was reminded that I miss that from time to time. Don't worry, my sweet. You keep taking care of me, and I'll keep taking care of you. Although if you can't keep him in line, I may have to have a conversation with him. I'm still pissed at him for sucker punching Ricky." She said, "You will not." If you attempt to harm so much as a hair on his head, you'll regret it. You will not hurt my husband. Do you hear me? This surprised Andrew and Pete. Andrew said, Fine, fine. If he means that much to you, I won't hurt the little man, but don't you forget who you belong to. That statement irritated her because she didn't belong to anyone, but if she did, it was to her husband. Also, get him under control. I don't want him sneaking up on me and hitting me in the back. That wouldn't end well for him. She said, I told you that the girls told me he didn't do that. I don't know how, but he supposedly beat him fair and square. Andrew laughed. I'm sure they just corroborated their stories. No way could that little kitty beat Ricky. No way. He's not a kitty, but if he is, he's my kitty bear. You let me handle him. Andrew laughed. As long as I get to handle you, I'll live with that for now. She wondered what he meant by for now. She didn't have to wait long. The second interesting exchange was after he left the message from the airport. Based on Andrew's attitude, Pete expected what came after. Joan said, Well, he's gone for a week. Andrew's smile was not pretty when he said, Outstanding. Now we can take a few more days off and screw some more. Joan replied, Yes, well, not if you keep screwing me so hard. You are going to bruise me. How am I going to explain that to him? Well, you aren't supposed to be screwing him very often, if at all, so how's he going to see it? He still sees me getting dressed. You told me you like for me to tease him. Andrew did smile at that thought. Well, if we get to have sex for the next week, you had better keep him away for a few days or he will feel how stretched out you are. She replied, A cool bath in 24 hours usually is enough for me to tighten back up. Besides, he isn't that much smaller than you. Andrew didn't want to hear that. Taking command, he said, Here's what we'll do. I'll be gentle like you want me to be, but not here. In my house or while we travel, I'll screw you the way I want. If we are in your house, I'll be sweet, like your cute little husband. You said he wouldn't be back until next Friday night. This worried Joan. She and Andrew had never had sex in her house before. I'm not so sure that's a good idea. Remember what I said yesterday. You do what I say, and everything will work out fine. If it worries you that much, I won't sleep at your home. We'll just have a few long lunches there. That will seem perfectly innocent. Joan hesitated a few minutes, but with Pete in Orlando, and then Savannah, she should be okay. She would just call him for a few minutes each morning and each night to check up on him. Okay, only long lunches. This just reconfirmed to her that she needed to get away from Andrew, and soon. But how? Andrew's evil smile reappeared because he was thinking that once he was inside the house, she would have a hard time getting him out. Andrew wasn't very worried about Pete showing up early. He could handle angry husbands, especially one the size of Pete. Pete made copies of all the videos that were in the cloud folder. Once they left Andrew's house, he would delete the server files, which meant that unless Ricky was saving them elsewhere, Pete should have the only copies. Pete had several calls he needed to make. Being a Friday afternoon, he hoped people were still working. His first call was to Brian. Hey, Brian. It's Pete. Got a sec? Sure, buddy. I have a few. What's up? Remember the conversation we were having at my house when Ricky showed up to apologize? I do. Pete said, It seems that what Ricky was bragging about is true. Joan has been having an affair. I don't know how long it has been going on, but I know it's been a while. Oh, man. I'm so sorry. I take it this isn't a social call. I'm afraid not. I need a favor. I need a very good divorce lawyer, quickly. Brain replied, Done. I know just the woman. She can be mean and vicious, or just get it over with, whichever you prefer. Let me give her your info, and she'll make time for you today. That sounds good. Also, please tell Miriam not to mention this to anyone. I know you don't keep secrets from her, so I need this kept quiet until I give Joan the papers. Probably next week. Sure, Pete. I'm sorry for both of you. We've always liked you and Joan. Pete said, Thanks, Brian. I'm sorry too. I owe you. No, you don't. We've been friends for a long time, and our daughters have been for even longer. This is just me helping a friend. When this is all said and done, you can buy me a beer or two if you want. I think I might enjoy that. Consider it done. Brian put feared family lawyer Charla Steele in touch with Pete, and she began to prepare divorce papers. That evening, he could see Joan's car had returned to their home. Just before Pete was planning on going to sleep, his phone rang. It was Joan. Hey, Pete. How's Orlando? Hot and humid, with a chance of rain, which is pretty normal for late August. How's Memphis? She replied, You mean Nashville? I got back this afternoon. It's lonely without you. I wish we could have another Friday night like last Friday night. Yeah, I'd like that too. Pete would love to go back to a month or so ago when he thought his wife was faithful and have a night like last Friday. But there was no going back. They talked a few more minutes, and she professed her love for him. Love you, Pete. Love you too, Joan. When he disconnected the call, he was terribly sad, but the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. The next day, Saturday, he went back to the airport and rented a car. He needed to get to a dojo and practice some. He couldn't use his car or go to his normal one for fear that someone there might know his wife or daughter and spill the beans on his being in town. He made a few calls and found one near the Opry, away from their home and her work, that would let him come. He spent Saturday and Sunday sparring and working in their gym. They were good workouts, and he felt pretty good about his current level of ability. He would text Joan and she would text back. He could see her car at their home, and the cameras showed that she was there alone on Saturday, but apparently Eva visited her on Sunday. That made him sad. He was about to lose his family. He didn't anticipate losing the kids, but with the upcoming divorce, their family unit would be no more. After a few minutes, his sadness changed to determination. He thought, oh, well, I guess you have to deal with what life gives you, which is what he was planning to do. On Monday morning, Pete received an unexpected phone call from Brian. Pete, I needed to give you a quick call. Joan called Miriam last night. She asked her if we would float her resume to our investment advisors because she felt it was time for a change. Miriam said she would look into it. What do you think? I realize this doesn't excuse the affair, but maybe she is trying to get away from the a-hole. Pete thought a minute. He thought about his family, what he planned to do, and how his life was likely to play out. While she would never be his wife again, it would probably cause fewer problems with the children if she could get away from Andrew. Yeah, go ahead. The damage has already been done, but I think that might make life easier on everyone. Brian replied, I understand. By Monday afternoon, Charla had the divorce papers prepared and Pete wondered if the liaison at his house would happen soon. Joan called him that night saying she missed him and loved him. He tried to return the affection. Donnie called him too, and they had a good chat. He suspected that Eva had some idea of what was going on, regardless of his protestations. But Donnie? Unless Eva told him, and she probably had, he was going to be blindsided by all of this. Damn you, Joan, he thought. Pete didn't sleep well that night. Pete worked from the hotel on Tuesday morning and around lunchtime was alerted by the GPS on Joan's car leaving her office going towards their home. They could ride together, but that might seem risky, so he suspected they would take their respective cars. His home security cameras alerted him to two cars pulling into his driveway. He made preparations to drive home. He wasn't in any hurry. He expected them to take several hours. Around 2 p.m., Joan said, we should be getting back. People will begin to look for us. Andrew replied, don't worry about it. I own the company. Nobody will question me. True, they won't question you, but they might wonder about me. I don't want anyone telling my husband. Why? You don't think he would divorce you, do you? Yet another confirmation that Andrew had no real interest in her beyond sex. I don't know. I know he wouldn't want to. He might get by a one-time mistake, but if he knew how long, I don't think he would forgive me. Andrew said, you've kept him in the dark for 3 years. I think you can manage. Yes, well maybe I can, if we only see each other once a month or so like we used to. The last few weeks have been dangerous. I'd like to keep it so that nobody but us knows, which is why at least I should get back to the office. Andrew smiled thinking about Ricky knowing and maybe participating sometime soon. Joan was a good employee, but not irreplaceable. Her future with the firm could be tied to how she behaves going forward. He thought he had her in a good place. She couldn't make waves at the office because it would eventually get back to her husband. The same thing went for her potentially accusing him of sexual harassment. Even if she tried that, accusations were one thing, but proving it when the affair had been going on so long would be extremely difficult. So he felt like he had the power and control over the situation. Pete had parked down the street, out of sight of the house. He had been there for an hour listening to their screwing and conversation from the Wi-Fi cameras that were streaming all movement and noise to the cloud. He heard the comment about 3 years and thought himself a fool. Rather than getting down, he used that to fuel his fire. He checked his home security system on his phone app to make sure no alarms were set and that there would be no chimes when he opened the back door. He snuck in and quietly climbed the stairs. Once at the landing, he heard Joan pleading, "Come on, Andrew. I need to get back to the office." Pete stepped into their bedroom and said, "That means get the hell out." Joan was stunned to see her husband standing there. She pulled the sheet to cover herself and exclaimed, "Pete, I thought you were in Savannah." This isn't what it looks like. Pete leaned against the doorframe and replied, "Now, Joan, normally you are a fairly intelligent woman, but that has to be the stupidest thing to ever come out of your mouth. Well, except for that dipshit." He could see his wife's face and neck flame red at that comment. "Good," he said. "At least you have some shame." Andrew said, Well, the little decided to come and see how a full-sized man takes care of your wife. Don't worry. She says she only loves you, but we both know that she loves having sex with me." "Shut up, Andrew. That's not true, Pete." She sobbed out, "I only love you." Pete replied, apparently not enough to stay away from this lard bum. To Andrew he said, "Well, I seem to recall it was your stupid baby boy on the ground the other day struggling to get up when I beat him with my bare hands. Maybe I should go give him another lesson for your screwing this 304, or would you care to take your best shot at me?" Though deserved, that comment hurt Joan. Pete had never said an ill thing about her. The other statement surely got Andrew's attention. "I'm going to beat you to death in your own house, in front of your little wife." She wanted a bigger and better man than you, and she got one. Yeah. Get your shorts or pants on and meet me in the backyard. I don't want your bum naked after I call the ambulance to come and collect you." As Andrew stood to retrieve his pants, Pete started laughing at Andrew, pointing at his tool. "Joan, you traded me in for that baby carrot? Good God. You can say that you wanted a taller man, but you definitely weren't interested in his being bigger." Actually, Andrew was a little bigger, as Joan described, but no man is ever in a good mood when someone laughs at his tool, and Pete wanted Andrew angry. Pete left the room, not waiting for either of them. Joan was crying even harder now. Seeing Andrew advance after her husband got her moving, though. She had to put a stop to this. She didn't want her husband hurt. She lunged for Andrew, but only managed to scratch the top of his shoulders and back with her fingernails. Surprised by her actions, Andrew, instinctively, turned and backhanded her, hard, which knocked her back against the headboard of the bed, hurting and stunning her to the point of near unconsciousness. Pete was already moving quickly down the stairs and, lucky for Andrew, didn't hear Joan being hit. He didn't want his home destroyed during the upcoming altercation because Pete had no intention of this ending quickly, nor did he have any intention of vacating his home. Pete inserted a mouthpiece, just in case. Then he sprinted into his backyard as if he were being chased, in full sight of his new security camera facing his backyard. Andrew wasn't far behind him. Andrew said, "I'm going to enjoy beating on you, Pete. After I'm done, I'm going to bring Joan here and screw her on one of the chairs by the pool so you can watch." Speaking around the mouthpiece, Pete said, "I don't care if you screw her or not. She doesn't matter to me anymore. What I'm doing here is teaching you not to screw married women. I expect it to be a painful lesson for you." In the backyard, Andrew smirked and walked up to Pete, hoping to simply grab him and beat the crap out of him. He thought that his superior reach should be a big help in the fight. As expected, Andrew at least showed a little more experience than Ricky and had his hands up in a typical boxing position. With his shirt off, Pete could see that Andrew had huge arms and shoulders to match his frame. Clearly, he spent some time in the gym, but the flab around his midsection suggested that he spent most of his time on the weights and had very little cardio. Well, except for screwing Joan. That would give the advantage to Pete in a longer fight and also suggested that his midsection could be soft. As long as Pete could avoid those big meaty fists from getting too close, he should be okay. For the security system's recording, Pete had his hands up as if he didn't want to fight. When he heard Andrew, he wanted to make sure it looked like it was self-defense. He only planned to release the video if Andrew tried to make up a story or file charges. Hopefully, nobody would ever see the video. Andrew rushed at Pete, throwing several jabs and trying to grab him. Pete easily stepped backwards, avoiding them. Andrew paused for a moment, and with Pete's hands up, Andrew appeared to again be the aggressor. Pete was just waiting for his moment. Andrew would rush throwing punches, and Pete would move out of the way or parry the punches with his arms. From the camera, Pete still looked as if he was trying to stay away from this much larger attacker. As long as he was careful, Pete could do this all day, but he could already see Andrew breathing hard. After a few minutes of this dance, Andrew's big right-handed haymaker came, as expected. It looked just like Ricky's, though from a stronger opponent. Just like he did against Ricky, he hit Andrew hard in his right kidney. While Andrew did bend over in pain, he didn't go down. That was no problem for Pete. Since Andrew wasn't recovering quickly, Pete jumped up and when he descended, delivered a vicious elbow down into the kidney area, with a loud thunk. Pete was hoping that the 12th rib was fully floating now after that strike. Andrew did go down this time onto his hands and knees. He He wasn't trying hard to get up, because he couldn't. His side was on fire. How did that little shit hit him so hard? Pete stood, waiting for Andrew to stand. With this being recorded, he needed Andrew to continue to look like the aggressor, but that was becoming harder to do. Eventually, Andrew stood and put his hands up like he planned to box again, but Pete could tell that he wasn't moving well. Now, Pete was enjoying Andrew throwing punches. With his rib hurting, the jabs weren't very hard. They almost looked more for show. He knew each punch thrown had to be excruciating, especially for someone not used to being hit or in pain. With Andrew moving more slowly, Pete could now return jabs, but each jab was purposefully to the side that was hit earlier, or to the kidney area on the opposite side. With each blow, the grimaces turned to anguish on Andrew's face. Andrew realized he wasn't going to win this fight. He hoped he could get close enough to the smaller man to rush him and grab him and take him down to the ground, because he realized he simply wasn't fast enough to hit the speedy guy. Also, his side was killing him, and he was starting to have a hard time breathing. Back in the bedroom, after regaining her wits, Joan threw on a robe to hurry down the stairs. On the way out of the bedroom, she grabbed her phone, calling 911 saying that her husband and her boss were fighting in her backyard and to send an ambulance. She froze as she went by her husband's home office and quickly ran inside. The next time Andrew tried to rush Pete, it was more of a lumbering, and he was off balance from the pain. Pete tripped him up, and when Andrew landed on his hands and knees, Pete pretended he was the kicker for the Titans. He wound up and got in the crushing groin shot he had wanted. Andrew's reaction was to cry out and curl into a fetal position with his hands trying to protect his balls. Too late. Andrew wouldn't be getting up without help, nor was it likely he would be getting it up anytime soon. Pity, Pete said to a moaning Andrew, who's the bear, now, a hole? I'm a screwing Kodiak compared to you. You're lucky I don't drag your bum into the pool and drown you. Pete sat on the ground about 10 feet away listening to Andrew whimper and moan in pain. Normally, he would have hated to see anyone hurting that badly. He felt nothing for this man, except maybe that a little justice had just been served. He was waiting for either the police or ambulance to arrive, hoping that Joan had called them. He was surprised that he hadn't seen her. Where was she? What happened next stunned Pete. Joan was running out of the house with the shotgun in her hands and a black eye beginning to show. She was going towards Andrew, pointing the gun, necessitating Pete to jump up and calm the distraught woman. She was yelling, "You will not hurt my husband. I'll kill you. Do you hear me? You will not hurt my husband." Not much chance of that happening. Pete hugged her to him, causing the gun to point down towards the ground, and he gently eased the gun out of her hands and set it on the ground away from them. Several minutes later, when the police officer arrived and approached them, she was still repeating, "You will not hurt my husband. You will not hurt my husband." It seemed she was coming undone. The officer removed the shells from the shotgun and then checked on the injured man. Speaking to dispatch, he heard the ambulance was only a few minutes away. By now, Andrew was coughing up blood, which surprised the officer because the only visible marks on him were on his sides, which were red, and it looked like some early bruising was setting in and some deep scratches on his upper back. He saw the forming black eye on Joan and spoke to her first. "Ma'am, are you okay?" That stopped her murmuring and seemed to rouse her. She replied, he. Then she sobbed for a moment and pointed towards Andrew. "He assaulted me. When my husband showed up, Andrew chased him." Pete was bewildered by the response. Assault? It was purely consensual. The officer asked, "Ma'am, you need to get to the hospital so the abuse can be documented." "Okay. Can my husband take me?" "Sure, but you need to go as soon as possible. Right now would be better." "I'll stay here by the attacker until the ambulance arrives," replied the officer. He looked Pete up and down and said, "You look unscathed. Let me guess, you're a black belt or something." Pete shook his head and said, "Or something. I know how to protect myself and my family, but I can promise you that I'm much more damaged than you can possibly imagine." The officer nodded, and Joan wept on her husband's shoulder, knowing that it wasn't Andrew that had hurt her husband. She was the one that had damaged him. Pete took Joan inside to put on some clothes to go to the hospital. She asked him if he would come with her to help her change, but he shook his head, no. He didn't want to go with her upstairs, because he didn't want to see the bedroom where she had been with her lover. Joan looked like she had aged 10 years as she descended the steps. The ambulance had arrived, and as they walked past the officer, Pete asked, "Can we have his car towed away? I don't want it here when we return." Joan doesn't need to see it. Not that he was that concerned about Joan. He just wanted it gone. The officer said he would take care of it. In the car, they drove in silence until almost halfway to the hospital. Joan said, Speak to me, Pete. Yell at me. Scream at me. Call me a 304 again, but tell me what you were thinking. Pete continued to drive. After another minute, he said, Assault? How are you going for assault? Everyone will know it was consensual. I won't lie for you. Joan's face fell. I would like to use this as a chance to keep him away from me. He was becoming too controlling, and I had planned to leave him and his firm anyway. So, I've heard. She looked at her husband with surprise. Just because I'm short in height doesn't mean I'm short in intellect. She whispered, I know. He said, I would ask you why you did it, but I already know. I'm sorry, she whispered. The sad thing is I would do almost anything for you. You know I would, but one of the few things I cannot change is the thing you held against me all these years. You should have never married me, Joan. Please don't say that. I made a horrible mistake. We've been so good together. We have a great family, a great house, and good jobs. We have a really good life. Well, except for your long-buried addiction for taller, larger men. That was a direct hit. He continued, besides, you should have thought of all of those wonderful things and decided an affair wasn't worth the risk. As a portfolio manager, you should know all about risk. I know. I was so stupid. Can you please forgive me? Pete shook his head. Maybe one day, but not anytime soon. She asked, so does that mean there is a chance we will stay together? No, that isn't going to happen. But, why? He scoffed. Why do you think? She replied, because of the affair? We can go to counseling. We can overcome this. Joan, this wasn't just an affair. His little shit of a son sent me a link on Friday to a cloud account where the sex fest you and Andrew had Thursday and Friday was recorded. She gasped at that revelation. I don't know if Andrew set it up or Ricky. Either way, I heard you. You won't have to worry about wearing high heels around me any longer. It never bothered me before. I wish I knew that it always bothered you. No longer will you have to worry about people thinking your short husband is an easy target to attack. Do you still think Eva made up the story about Paris? Joan, shaking her head, no, was almost imperceptible, but it was very clear. Oh, also, just so you know. When Ricky emailed me the link in his message, he said that Andrew had agreed to find a way to let him screw you, too. No wonder he came into our backyard as if he owned it. He had no respect for me, nor for us. Why should he, when his father didn't either? And who disrespected our marriage first? That would be you, Joan. She was devastated at the realization that she had disrespected Pete first. Also, she was appalled at the idea of Ricky thinking he could have sex with her. She didn't like Ricky. Now she knew why he had been hanging around so much. She couldn't believe she had fallen so far. Pete, I don't know what to say, except to keep saying that I'm sorry. You may be, but sorry isn't enough. You lost faith in me. You lost respect for me. Even though I'm a better man than him in every way, that just wasn't enough for you. Was it? Joan looked out the window as the tears streamed down her face. She asked, what now? I had planned to give you divorce papers today. I'll hold off a little while on those depending on how the next few days go. We are still getting divorced, but giving you the papers on the day you were supposedly assaulted probably wouldn't look good in family court. He asked, so how do you plan to pull off assault? And what was with the shotgun? Do you plan to send an innocent man to jail? I wanted to send him to the morgue, but you were just as guilty as he is. So, that comment made her want to leap from the moving car. Joan said, there is nothing innocent about him. All you have to say to the police is that I was crying when you got to the bedroom. You didn't see anything else. Once Andrew saw you, he came after you. I'll take care of the rest. That way you don't have to lie. That is a lie, he said. I know, but I was pleading for him to leave. The tears would have been coming soon thereafter. I have this black eye to prove he hit me and skin from his back under my fingernails to show that I tried to fight him off. Pete said, and don't forget your inner part full of his come to show that he screwed you. Oops. I mean assaulted you. Joan lost it at that comment and started sobbing. Pete asked, you still haven't told me why you got the shotgun. Pulling herself together, she said, crazy things can happen in fights. I wasn't going to let him hurt you. I didn't know how long I had been out of it, so I grabbed it, not knowing what the scene would be like when I came outside. Well, was it what you expected to see? They both knew the answer to that question. Pete did appreciate her desire to protect him from harm, but she should have felt that way 3 years ago and not started an affair. A few minutes later, while still in the car, Pete called Brian. Brian, it's Pete. Joan and I are on the way to the hospital. We are both okay, but we need a good attorney and we need him or her fast. I'll give you the details as soon as I can, probably later today. Oh, man. Sorry to hear that. I'll make a few calls. Are you going to Williamson's Medical Center? We are. Brian said, okay. Good. I'm glad you were keeping it in the family. Sorry, that was my poor attempt to lighten the situation. I'll make sure that someone will meet you shortly. Don't talk to anyone until you talk to your attorney. Pete replied, we understand, and thanks, Brian. Pete disconnected the call and looked at his soon-to-be ex-wife. You understood that, right? This is a dangerous game you are playing, and you need to get your story straight before you tie yourself up in lies and end up in jail yourself. On top of the adultery, I'm sure your children and family would love to have to go visit you in jail. Internally, Joan groaned at her predicament. Maybe she should leap from the car after all. As Brian mentioned, they were met in the emergency room by the hospital administrator and senior legal counsel. They knew Brian personally, and the attorney was distantly related. They were mainly there to ensure that they were seen immediately and that no one tried to question them until they had met with the attorney that Brian was sending. When the attorney showed up, she quickly got to what Joan was trying to achieve. They slowly documented what led up to today, including the length of the affair, some of the details, Ricky showing up and getting involved, the videos from Andrew's place, and the videos from the Clark security system. Joan was humiliated having to detail everything in front of her husband. Pete was past being angry. He was simply numb. Who was this person he had been living with? Ultimately, the attorney advised Joan to seek an out-of-court settlement that would see her compensated long enough to get on with another firm. She didn't think the DA's office would seek to prosecute a criminal case because of the length of the affair, which made today seem like sour grapes, perhaps unfortunate, but that was what was most likely to occur. Also, Andrew's side of the story would set up a case, and would be hard to get 12 people to convict him. So why would the DA waste the court's time, which would likely only end in a hung jury? However, Andrew would probably want his name and firm kept out of civil court, and more importantly, the headlines. Also, he would probably prefer no mention of the beating he took while at the house of a married woman from her husband. At this point, Pete asked for a couple of minutes with Joan. He said, I don't care if the settlement is for $10,000 or $10 million. In the divorce papers, I plan to ask for the house, a 50-50th split of all other assets, excluding my consulting business and no alimony. So, you may want to try and get as much as you can. Wait, I want to amend that. You can have the bed. After today, that filthy thing is yours to do with as you wish. That comment told her that she would truly be alone in pursuing the matter. She was certain that her husband was going to leave her. She knew it was her fault, but facing this by herself was almost overwhelming. She said, You would be willing to fight me for the house? He replied, After everything I've learned over the last few weeks, after what I've seen on video the last few days, after what I saw in our bedroom today, and after what I did to your lover a short while ago, you would ask me what I'm willing to do? You may want to think about what I could do, should I be so determined. Imagine what I could do with those videos and who I could send them to. Your laptop backups are on our home server, so I have the contact information for all of your clients and many of the firm's others, and could send them some nice video of their investment advisor not taking vows seriously, nor showing good judgment. How many of them do you think would want to keep working with you? Go ask your lover how angry I am and what I'm willing to do. Trust me, he got off easy. If the only extra thing I take from the marriage you destroyed is our house, then you will have gotten off easy, too. Every time he said the word lover, it was like a red-hot poker placed against her flesh. It wounded her, but what could she say? She couldn't deny it. There were no extenuating circumstances. Not willing to fight Pete over the absolute mess that she made, she agreed with him and decided she would get whatever she could from the prick that helped her screw up her marriage. Ultimately, after Andrew's surgeries, Joan got a payout from him. It took several weeks to negotiate and a couple more to get the check, but it was enough that if it took her a couple of years to find work and get back to what she was making, she would survive. Not long after that, she did land a new job with the investment advisors that Brian and Miriam used. It didn't pay quite as well as her old one, but it was with a large multinational firm, so she at least had prospects. She found a condo near her new job and set up house, 3 bedrooms so the kids could come and stay some, hopefully. She gave away the old bedroom set. She didn't want it either. She did her best to put her mistakes behind her, but the nights were the worst. She vacillated between feeling numbness and heart-wrenching despair. Several times she called Pete and cried before hanging up. She didn't actually say anything. She would probably need to see a shrink and hopefully receive a lot of sympathy or hugs from the kids and a few of her siblings that lived nearby. One of the things that helped her with her new company was that she poached some of her old clients from Andrew, which was pretty easy because they liked her and were ready to leave Andrew's firm because someone tipped a reporter to seek an FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, request looking into a police report involving Andrew at the house of a married woman. It seems the officer wrote a rather detailed description of the incident, including the attacked but avenged husband, the abused victim, claiming assault, and brandishing a shotgun to ensure that her husband was not hurt. The sensational story started in the papers and eventually made it onto the local evening news. Once out of the hospital, Andrew's only answer to questions was, "It is a private matter." No comment. As for Andrew, he had multiple surgeries that ended up saving the damaged kidney, stabilized the rib, and restored partial functionality to a testicle. There was hope that he would one day achieve an erection, but he may need another surgery and it would likely be painful. For Pete, it had been the longest few weeks of his life. He tried to stay on the road as much as possible. The next several months and into the Thanksgiving holiday were painful as well. He felt physically ill the day that Joan moved out. The breakup of their family unit was worse than when his grandparents died. Eva was at least partially prepared. With what Ricky said, he had planted that seed of doubt, which grew into the truth. She hated what her mom did. Hated it. How could anyone hurt her father like that? Even with her dad being the innocent party, she knew this was going to hurt him for a while. Her mom would be okay. Eva figured she would find some way to justify her actions, or maybe this would kick some sense into her. She would look after her mom, also, and try to forgive her. She knew that it would take a long time for their relationship to recover. Eva had prepped Donnie so that he wasn't completely caught off guard. He was livid with his mother. Being in his last semester at Georgia Tech meant it was much easier to stay out of the whole mess and duck his mother's phone calls if he wanted to. The whole situation sucked and didn't help the kids with their studies. Even though he got the house and the divorce, with the kids being gone, Pete wondered if he should just sell it. Then the three sisters stepped in to try and cheer him up. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.